So welcome everyone. Welcome to Toolkit Tuesday. Today's session is called Take the Thinking Out of Thinking, How to Mitigate Unconscious Bias. So when we make decisions based on a gut feel, which many of us do, we're actually relying on brain processes that lead to unconscious bias. This kind of thinking leads to seriously flawed decisions of which we are wholly unaware. In this Toolkit Tuesday session, Dr. Barth will explain what unconscious bias is, how it works against us, and what tools and tactics are necessary to minimize its influence on our decision-making. The end goal today, you will leave here with not only a better understanding of how bias works, but also with some tools and tactics on how to combat it, so you can better continue to collaborate in the building of a safe and inclusive community. So to experience today's presentation in American Sign Language, please pan or spotlight the presenter, Erin, and both the interpreters, Samantha and Robin, to the top of your gallery. In addition, anyone in today's session can access the Zoom closed caption function by clicking on the closed captioning option at the bottom of your screen. So just in case someone here doesn't know it, I am Mickey Campo. I'm a program manager at Innovation Guelph. And I'm really happy that you decided to join us here today for lunch. Today's session is going to be great, and I'm really happy you're all here. I would like to take a moment to quickly thank all of our wonderful sponsors: Ernst & Young, ISU Software Corps, Marexis, Miller Thompson, OKR Financial, Reese Informatica, Invest in Guelph, and of course, BDO. We're very grateful for all of the support that they give us in everything that we do. So in addition, thank you to Sign Language Interpreting Associates of Ottawa. We thank you very much for providing the ASL interpretation for all of our Toolkit Tuesday sessions. So before I hand over the screen officially to Erin, I would like to briefly introduce Innovation Guelph to you as well. Well, many of you on the call today do know who Innovation Guelph is and what we do. I would like to give you a brief background. We are one of 17 regional innovation centers in Ontario. And while we're located in Guelph, we actually service the entire region of southwestern Ontario and have one national account. So what that means is we work with clients in Guelph, and we also work with clients all across Ontario and all across Canada, from BC all the way to Nova Scotia. So we support clients through mentorship programs, event workshops like these, in multitudes of different sectors and growth stages. So lots of programs for you to explore online. Take a look at our website, and you can learn more by any time. Reach out by email, and we'll be happy to respond and answer any questions. But I'm not going to take any more of your time today. I would like to introduce our speaker and get the show on the road. So today's speaker is Dr. Barth. He's a TEDx speaker and workplace science, e-learning, and inclusion expert. And he's also an Innovation Guelph alumni client. As a thought leader and the president of Dialectic, Erin gives progressive leaders the confidence they need to tackle the hardest people problems using scientific method, innovative technical solutions.
For now, yeah.
Erin uses science to reveal the barriers and enablers of healthy and productive workforces and inspires people to be the pillars of change within their workplace. He outlines the path to action by offering tools and tactics for thriving workplace culture. And he believes in awareness as the most important is very important in eliminating systematic issues in the workplace. So today we welcome Dr. Barth to teach us how to take the thinking out of thinking. So welcome, Erin. I'll hand things over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Let me just get my screen up and running here. Okay, and just make sure I've got participants. Okay. All right, so can you see my screen and can you hear me? Brilliant. All right, so I'm going to start today. I'm going to give you, I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I want you to write down the answer to these 3 questions, either on your computer or on a piece of paper, and then keep it with you because we're going to need it for the rest of the session. Okay. So here's the first question. Out of 100 people, 30 are librarians and 70 are lawyers. Read the following description and decide if the person is a librarian or lawyer. Susan is very shy and withdrawn, very helpful, but with little interest in people, a meek and tidy soul. She has a need for order and structure and a passion for detail. Lawyer or librarian, write it down. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Now for this one, I'm going to show you a list of companies and I want you to list them in order of highest to lowest revenue. Ready? Go. Highest to lowest in terms of revenue. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay, so for this question, I'm going to show you a list of 10 words, and I'm going to leave it on the screen for 10 seconds, and then I'm going to take it away. And your job is to recreate the list. Now, in order for your entries to be correct, they have to be in the right order and they have to be spelled correctly. And no taking screenshots or writing anything down while the list is up there. Okay, so I'm going to show it for 10 seconds, take it away, you recreate it. Go. See? Don't write anything down, nothing yet. Okay, recreate the list. All right. So now you put your pens down or whatever you've been using to write. I just have a question, and you can put on your microphone or use the chat to answer this question. Okay. So, is this computer expensive? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. How about now? How about now? So what's going on here? Again, just use your microphone or write it in the chat. What's happening here?
I mean, you're comparing one price to the other. So comparing that 3,000 to 1,700 almost is, yes, that is not as expensive.
Exactly. So here's the thing. As human beings, we're really, really good at relative judgments and really, really bad at absolute judgments. So when I show you this in the abstract with no anchor, usually we get kind of half and half. Yes, no, that it's expensive. But as we now see a larger price with it slashed out, it looks like a good deal. And now it looks like an even better deal, right? So advertisers know this. They've been using this forever and they use it against you. Okay, here's another example. You're at Amazon, you're about to check out. I'm buying this book, The Design of Everyday Things. I go to check out and this pops up. It says, add another 1610 and get free shipping. So what's going on there? What's the idea? What's the tactic? Yeah, suggestive selling, upselling. How are they doing it? Persuasion, foot in the door. How are they doing that? How are they upselling you? Yeah, so by offering, I see someone already wrote it, emotional selling. So they're offering you something free. So free, it's this 4-letter word, and it incites an emotional response in us. And that emotional response has us then going back and into the store and attaching value to things we weren't even thinking about. But here's the catch, and I've just screen capped it over here. Domestic shipping is under $5, right? So This free shipping gambit is pretty successful, and it's because it's an emotional appeal. Okay, so everyone close their eyes, okay? So imagine we're back in a world in which we're actually going out and
redirect you, Paul. And doing.
So imagine we're back in the world, we're going out, you're on a date, okay? And you really want to impress the person you're with on this date, okay? That's what you got to remember. You really want to impress them. The waiter comes over with a wine list, and you really want to impress this person. Open your eyes. Where do your eyes go first if you really want to impress this person? Yeah. So I've seen people indicate the bottom, right? The most expensive one. So that's where most of our eyes go first, but you never buy that one. And the reason is we always want the best and we never want to pay top dollar for it. So where would your eyes go next? You still really want to impress this person. Where do your eyes go next?
My favorite wine.
Yeah, okay. Well, if it happens to be on here, that's a stroke of luck, right? Yeah, so on average, someone said it, our eyes go to the second most expensive. Now, good restaurant owners know this. Guess which bottle of wine has the biggest markup? That second most expensive one. Okay, so showing you these examples, what's going on in all of these examples? How would you explain these three examples I've just given you with the price of the computer, the free shipping, and the wine list? What's happening here? Impulse, yeah. Again, you can just turn on your microphone or your video if you want and just answer. Yeah, emotional decisions for sure, right? So here's the thing. Now I'm showing you these behavioral economics examples because they're really easy. They're really accessible. We've all faced these things, right? So here's the thing. There are facts about the way we think, okay? And in marketing in particular, those facts are often used to get the most money out of us, right? But look at what 3 minutes of education about these facts show us, right? Once you're educated about these thinking facts, right, about the way our brains work, even in this like really, really cursory explanation, you're not going to be taken by these as easily, right? The next time you see the price slashed out, you're going to remember like, oh, I remember what Aaron told me about this. It's not necessarily a good deal. The next time you see the free shipping gambit, you might just not worry about it. And, you might just, next time you're out, once we're back in the real world, you might buy the most expensive bottle of wine just to stick it to the restaurant owner. And so what I want to do today, I'm not trying to make you into marketing executives. That's not the idea here. But the idea is, can we sharpen what I call our reflective thinking skills, right? And a reflective thinker is someone who can analyze their own thinking, right? They're aware of the assumptions. Someone wrote that we're making assumptions in these examples. Are we, becoming aware of our own assumptions, our beliefs, and the inferences that we're drawing, right? And once we're aware of those and we can analyze them, then we can evaluate them. Is this a good assumption? Does this belief map onto the world in the sense that it's true? Does this inference hold that I'm making? And then finally, if you can evaluate them, then you can improve your thinking, right? Because you can say, I'm going to minimize these mistakes that I'm going to make, or these assumptions I don't think are very good. And I'm going to maximize the things that I have more confidence in. And so what I want to do today is, help everybody in this session ascend up this hierarchy of becoming a more reflective thinker. So what we're going to look at, we only have an hour, so I can only really scratch the surface. I can only really show you the tip of the iceberg. We're going to look at unconscious bias through the lens of what's called fast thinking, and you'll understand what that is soon enough. So we're going to look at what fast thinking and unconscious bias is. We're going to look at how it works, and then finally we're going to look at how to get better at it. This session is going to be very interactive, so I really it would be helpful to me if you turned on your screens, your videos, so I can see you. You can feel free to engage at any point with your microphone. You can ask a question at any time. We will take questions at the end as well. But and don't worry about taking notes. I'll send out a summary of this after. Well, Innovation Guelph will send out a summary of this after. Okay, so let's go. So I'm going to show you a word, and what I want you to do is just either use your microphone to tell me what you think this word means, or write in the chat what it means. Okay, what comes to mind? How would you define this? Okay, so here's the word: intuition. What is intuition? Yeah, gut feel, good. What else?
Intuition can come from previous experience.
Yep. Okay. Mind-body connection, I like that. What someone feels, it's good. Inner knowledge, a sixth sense.
An instinct.
Yeah, okay, good. So that's a good question. Are we born with intuition? If it's an instinct, are we born with it? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What about, so someone said inner knowledge. So that's a good idea. What about the connection between reason and intuition? Are they the same thing, or how are they related? Do we know? Is intuition a form of reasoning, or is it different? Yeah, okay, so someone says it's more, reason is more logical. And that's kind of a recasting of the problem. What's the relationship between?
So if I could say something real quick, I believe that reason is more conscious, whereas intuition is more subconscious.
Right. So reason is something that we actively engage and we're aware of. Intuition is something that's kind of below the surface and emerges, and we don't really have as much control over. It's more reason is more deliberate. Intuition is more instinctive. Someone says, reason's more logical. So again, that's a recasting of the problem. So what's the, is intuition logical or is it illogical? And if you trust it, why? Why do you trust it? Yeah, and if it's illogical, then where does the trust in our intuitions, where does that come from? So these are all really important questions that we're going to try to answer as best we can in this time that we have today. So I just asked you, what is intuition, what the definition is. That's kind of coming at it straight on, but let's come at it from the side here, right? So here's you, right? Every day we're inundated with information, right? And especially in our sort of modern context, this is a relative bombardment of information when you compare it to sort of, our evolution as a species, right? So what are, if you think about the number of things that come at you every day, there's many things, right? In a business context, there are, logistical things like emails and whatnot, but then there are also like really important decisions, different things that are happening to your business that you have to respond to each day, and you have to move through these things, right? So that's the stuff that's coming at us, all the information that's coming at us. But at the same time, we face a bunch of uncertainty, right? We put things out into the world. We don't know exactly how they're going to play out. And so we take on a level of risk in the actions that we partake in and in the things that we say. We don't control everything, right? And so we're really put in this situation, right, where we have all this complexity of our modern world. We also have a bunch of risk and uncertainty. There's things that we can't control, and they could turn out in ways that aren't how we expected. Then we're put under a ton of time pressure, right? Things have to happen quickly, and we're asked to make this decision. So this feels like an untenable situation, right? It feels like we get put in a fight or flight situation. So intuition, one way to think about it is that it's your brain's fight response to all of that complexity, all of that risk, and all of that time pressure. And if we had to nutshell how your brain does that, how it fights that complexity and risk and time pressure, it's by relying on experience. So here's our first definition of intuition. It's our ability to think about a current situation based on our past experience. So what sorts of things in a business context counts as your experience? And you're not allowed to say everything. What are the big things, like when you get that gut feel and that intuition, what kind of experiences do you think loom largest in that experience, past crisis?
Mostly
fear.
bad.
Yeah, well, we have a negativity bias, right? Like we're always looking for threats and to minimize those. Exactly. Yeah, failures and successes, right? Relationships, all of these things count as our experience. And when we get that intuition about what to do, it's those things that our brain is using as a jumping off point. So here's your brain. Here's your brain on drugs. Does anyone remember those commercials? I grew up on those commercials. They were on, like, they actually came, this commercial would happen during Saturday cartoons. That's when it was on, right? So your brain has two sorts of systems, okay? And they're unimaginatively termed or called in the psychological literature, system 1 and system 2. System 1 is that subconscious part of our brain, right? It's the operating system. It's like the operating system on our phone. It's always there and it's operating in the background. System 2 is the conscious mind. That's like an app, right? It's more deliberate, it's focused, it's something that we're aware of. So where do you think intuition lies on this spectrum of system 1 and system 2? Is it subconscious or is it conscious? Or my favorite answer, it's somewhere in the middle. What do you think? So some people say system 2, which is conscious. Someone said it's subconscious. Think about how it works, right? It just kind of happens, right? So below and combined, yeah. So what the literature and what the studies show us is that intuition is largely a subconscious process. And if you pause and think about it, that makes a ton of sense, because think about how quickly it happens, right? And think about how little control you have over whether you get that gut feel or not. It's like it just kind of happens. It happens very quickly, and so it makes sense that it's subconscious, because it doesn't have to bubble to our awareness. We don't have to concentrate on it for it to happen. It just happens. So now our definition of intuition is a little bit better, right? It's our ability to think about a current situation subconsciously based on our past experience, okay? So that's what it is, our ability to think about a current situation subconsciously based on our past experience. How does it actually work? Well, we're only going to look at one component because of time today, okay? So tell me, A or B here? A or B? What do you think? A or B? A or B? A or B? Okay, A, B, C, D, E, or F? Okay, last one. Here we go. A, B, C, D, E, or F? Okay. So what's going on here? What would you call this? You use your mics, yeah. Yeah, pattern matching, exactly. Right? So this is pattern matching here. What did you think about it? Did you have to think about it? Now, I'll leave it with you to wonder whether, to the extent to which you actually had to think about that. Okay, so here, what I want you to do, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you instructions first. Don't do it until, sorry, the phone's ringing in here, until I'm done giving you the instructions. So, yeah, just wait, I'm going to mute. Just give me 2 seconds till this is done. Okay, so now what I want you to do is close your right eye, stare at the circle, and tell me what happens. Just tell me what happens. And if you need, and you may need to move your head towards or away from the screen. So close your right eye, stare at the circle, tell me what happens.
The square disappeared.
Yeah. Okay. So hopefully everyone can get that to happen. So yes, close your right eye, stare at the circle, square disappears. Weird, right? So we all have this. It's where the optic nerve attaches to the retina. Now, what would we call this? What's a colloquial way of referring to this? Yeah, perfect. A blind spot. Okay, but let's think about it for a second. If this were a true blind spot, what would you see in place of the square? What color do we usually associate with, a blind spot? Yeah, black. But that's not what we see here, right? What do we see in place of the square?
White.
Yeah, white. Why?
No.
Our brain is filling the information
With what?
with the background.
Yeah. So the most familiar pattern on the screen here is white, right? White space. And your brain just literally feels like magic, fills it in. And here's the important question. Did you think about it? No.
No.
So that's the first component of how intuition works that we're going to look at today, and the only component given time. So pattern matching. Our brain constructs a picture of the world, right, by matching our past experiences to our current ones. And when there's a similar enough match, you get that gut feeling. It's a feeling as though you've seen this before, right? So we're really, really quite good at this. And often we don't have to think about it. And so if intuition's our ability to think about a current situation subconsciously based on our past experience, what we're really doing is looking for patterns between our past experience and our current one. And when a match is found, we get that feeling. It's almost like a feeling of deja vu. You get that kind of really visceral physical response that you've seen this before and you know what to do, because of course you've seen something similar and you've acted in that situation, and maybe that action is going to apply for this current situation. That's the assumption that our brain makes. So pretty neat, right? So if you think about on a daily basis, when you're running your business or working in your role, that things happen over and over, right? We become really, really good at seeing similar problems and solving them in similar ways. And we get very, very, very good at that. And so every experience you have becomes part of the reservoir or bank of experiences your brain's going to use when it faces a novel situation or what appears to be a novel situation. And our intuition tries to get us to a quick way of handling that situation, because often we're under time pressure. Well, how does it do that? It accesses our past experiences. Now, I'm deliberately talking about your mind and brain doing this work, because you're not consciously doing it. That's what we've already established. It's happening under the hood, right? It's happening under the covers. Your brain's doing this matching thing and delivering what it seems as a reasonable suggestion in the current situation, which is to do what you did before in a similar situation. Okay, so now which square here is darker, A or B? And if you can't see this, yeah, if you can't see, I got a good optometrist. I can give you a referral. Okay, so A definitely looks darker. Okay, now I'm going to show you this. If we were in person, I would have a hard copy and have people cut this out so we could see it physically. I can only do this digitally here, but there is no sleight of hand going on. They're actually the same color. Okay, because these two bands are the same color and they swipe out the same amount of area on the squares. So it's really messed up, right? This is a messed up situation, messed up example. Why do we see them as different colors?
Because of what they're next to.
Yeah, it's a checkerboard pattern. And so that's what our brain picks up on and sees them as different. But it's wrong. Now, this is a metaphor, okay? The metaphor is that our visual system, right, is one of the most evolved biological systems that we have. And it's responsible for a lot of our safety. Like, you don't get hit by buses when you cross the street because your eyes pick up on the depth of the approaching objects and cars, and you're able to judge that, right? So it's really well tuned. It's a well-oiled machine, your visual system. And it makes pattern matching mistakes, right? You see it right here. And the metaphor is, now imagine a way less evolved biological system, like your ability to make decisions about your business. What's the probability that it's making pattern matching mistakes? It's pretty high. Yeah. So I show you, right, the geometrical shapes. You're able to just go A, B, this is easy, do, right? I show you the square and the circle, and your brain just like magically fills in the gap. You don't even have to think about it. but it's not always correct, right? There's a trade-off with the speed, right? And the overall satisfactory deliverance of intuition. The trade-off is it's not always correct, right? So, what I want to show you is the coolest thing about this example. Okay, so we've just talked about this for a couple minutes, right? If I take away these bars, you can't help but see them as different colors, even though you know intellectually they're the same. You know that. I've just showed you that. But you cannot see it that way. So that's how strong this pattern matching instinct is that we have. And we know it's not always right. So that creates an interesting problem about intuition, that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I'll go on the record to say intuition is one of the greatest evolved abilities we have as a species. It's an amazing thing that it can quickly deliver pretty good answers to questions and problems very fast, but it's not always correct. So how do we get better at it, right? So we've looked at what it is. It's intuition, or fast thinking is our ability to think about a current situation subconsciously based on our past experience. We've looked at one aspect of how it works, which is pattern matching. When our brain is put in that situation, it relies on past experiences to match with our current situation and tries to give us a very quick serviceable answer, which it does. But we've looked at how even that pattern matching, even when we're talking about our visual system, is not always correct. So getting better at intuition is understanding when those systems could be misfiring and having quick ways to address that. So you get that gut feel. How do we check that? And my point isn't that it's never correct, because sometimes it is. And my point won't be don't ever trust your intuition, because I believe you sometimes should. But what you need to be able to do is understand when and where, when to trust it and when not to trust it. Have some way of submitting it to analysis. And that's what we're going to look at this last part of the session. So everybody here is probably sitting in front of a desk of some sort. It could be your kitchen table. It could be a proper workstation. How wide is that workstation in front of you? What do you think?
"20 inches.
Okay, so doesn't matter what the answer is. Now I want you to reflect on, how did you get there? What went through your mind when you tried to guess at the width of the table in front of you, or the surface in front of you? How'd you do it? Yeah, so someone said go ahead.
Comparing with things I've seen before.
Yeah, someone said they broke it into feet. So I often hear, I imagine lying down on it, right? I know how tall I am, and then I use that to kind of figure it out. Pretty serviceable way of getting at it. Is it going to be correct to the inch? Probably not, right? If I gave you a measuring tape, which I would do if we were in a live session, and we'd look at that, there's a precise tool to be able to get to the right answer. But our brain's not really like that. It's not really interested in that level of precision. It's more interested in a quick, pretty good answer. So it takes, like what you did, shortcuts, right? Shortcuts to come up with a quick, serviceable answer. And so in the literature, that's called a heuristic. So our brain uses these heuristics, which are rules of thumb or shortcuts, to quickly assess a situation and come up with a fast, pretty good answer. But it helps most of the time, right? It's pretty good. Again, intuition is an amazing mental process that we have that has evolved in us as a species. But it's using these rules of thumbs and shortcuts, and it's not always correct. And when it's incorrect, that's when we get biases. That's when we get unconscious biases. Now, I'm not talking about a bias in terms of writing a news article from a particular political standpoint, not that kind of bias. We're talking about a cognitive bias, where our brain, because of the way it assesses a situation, gives differential support to certain ideas or problem-solving strategies or answers over others, because it's taking these shortcuts to get at a quick decision to be able to match our current experience to our past experiences. So getting better at intuition is understanding that when we get that gut feel, what shortcuts might our brain be taking? And how can we, and then what biases might that be eliciting in our analysis of the situation? And asking quick questions to be able to unravel those potential biases to get at a better answer. So we're going to look at a few here for the rest of the session. So the first is availability. It's called the availability shortcut. Don't worry about what the name is. That doesn't matter really. But the idea of availability is basing our thinking on how easily information and examples can be brought to mind. If they're easy to be brought to mind, they're more available to our brain. That's where the name comes from. So I gave you this question, right? How many of you had eBay, Microsoft, Starbucks, and Nike in your top 5? Probably a lot of you. How can I guess that? How can I know that without looking at your answers?
Because they're the most popular brands.
You got it. Here are the real answers. So the only one that cracks the top 5 there is Microsoft. So our brain makes this erroneous inference from brand awareness or publicity, which, by the way, is a good reason to do good marketing, but it makes an erroneous inference from brand awareness to financial results, and it turns out to be wrong. Now, you might say, well, look, Aaron, like you gave me 5 seconds to do this thing, and you gave us no other information. But my response to that is, almost all of the decisions you make on a daily basis is made under conditions of uncertainty. You never have all the information. You are always trying to make the best of the information that you do have, right? And one of the tactics your brain uses to do that is availability. Do I know it? Is it easy? Your brain's lazy, right? It just wants to take what's easy for it to make a quick decision, and it's not always correct. So I call this the first thing that comes to mind bias, right? That we often default to that first thing that pops into our head, right? So here's an example from just if you're running your business or running your business unit, revenue is lower than projected. I need to, fill in the blank. Whatever is that first thing that pops into your mind. It might be, I need to sell more. I need to raise prices. I need to reduce costs. Whatever the answer is, it doesn't matter, but that there will be something that immediately pops into your head. Now that may be correct, right? So the remedy here is the quick question to ask yourself is the following question is, am I too focused on the first thing that comes to mind, right? So a problem is posed or a decision needs to be made, there's going to be something that immediately pops into your head. It may be accompanied by a gut feel that it's correct. Ask yourself, am I too focused on that first thing? And the insight is this. Now, the first thing that comes into your brain might be the right answer. I'm not saying it never is, but it's never the correct answer because it's the first thing that popped into your brain. The first thing that it's the first thing that popped into your brain because it's more available, not because it's correct. Okay, that's the first one. And here's the second one. It's called representativeness. So that's simply basing our thinking on how a person, situation, or a thing fits into a category. So I gave you this question about Susan, right? So who answered lawyer to this? You just think about it to yourself. You can put your, raise your hand. Yeah, okay. And who answered librarian to this? Now, someone tell me, why did you answer? Why did you give your answer? Think back to what went through your head at the time of me posing this question. How did you come to your answer?
I actually picked lawyer because it said she had a need for order, structure, and then the passion. I felt like as a lawyer, you need to have some kind of passion and need for order and structure.
That's perfect.
But it's applicable to a librarian as well, though.
It is. Well, that's how it's designed, right? That's how the question's designed. So very good. So essentially, if I may reconstruct your thinking, the idea was I formed this prototype or picture of what a librarian and a lawyer is. I read the description and I do this, and I do this matching thing. Do they fit into this category or better fit into that category, right? Is this description representative of a lawyer or librarian? But I told you, here's the thing. I actually told you at the beginning, out of 100 people, 30 are librarians and 70 are lawyers. So you had better than 2-to-1 odds of not even reading the description and just guessing lawyer based on the probabilities. How many of you thought about those numbers in making your decision? And how many of you right now are thinking, I don't even remember seeing these numbers, but I showed it, I said it, it was there just as long as the description was there. So our brain is way more interested in doing this representative thinking than in crunching the numbers. Again, it's super lazy, doesn't want to deal with the numbers. So much so that a lot of you, it was just erased from your memory that I showed you the numbers. That's how strong the instinct is to do this categorical judgment about, in this case, people, right? And so here we come to the real source of what is now being called unconscious bias. It's kind of been reserved for this specific unconscious bias. I hope what I'm showing you today is the science behind all unconscious biases, one of which is this stereotype bias. Now, there's a good reason why it's been given a lot of attention, because it's the most harmful, it's the most nefarious, and it's the one we need to change the quickest, and the one that stands to benefit society the most, right? But this instinct to judge people is deep in our psychology. And it's actually really based on a thing called the similarity bias. And the basis of that is really simple. When we were living in communities that didn't really resemble our modern society, but more, tribes, and we were less evolved as a species at the time, We needed a quick way to decide when we saw, a new person or a new animal, is this thing likely to be a threat or is it likely to be friendly? And the criterion that we used instinctively was, is that thing similar to me? Well, then it's very likely to be friendly. And if it's dissimilar to me, then it's very likely to be a threat. And actually that worked pretty well in these proto-cultures, proto-communities that we had. But they're no longer relevant in our modern society. But try telling that to your brain, right? Your brain still is going to do this thing because it literally has millions of years of evolution tied to this way of judging, this way of coming to quick decisions about people. And so what we're engaged in now as a global community is trying to unravel that and trying to change the evolutionary arc of the way we judge other people and the way we work with other people and the way we treat other people. So, an example from work might be, you have a new client, they arrive disheveled for your meeting. So what would the instinctive response be if you were under the spell of the stereotype bias? What might be a harmful way of analyzing this situation and that person? What would you think of that client? Yeah, doesn't care maybe about the meeting. That's an interesting one. Exactly. Like didn't even get dressed up, right? Massive judgment. Lazy. This is really good. That they're lazy, that they're not competent. All from their appearance, right? All from the way they look. But what could be an equally what could equally be an explanation for their disheveledness that's less judgy?
Maybe they had a family emergency, maybe their car broke down, maybe they're just having a bad start to their day.
You got it. And what's interesting is we often will provide that kind of an assessment if it's us who is the disheveled person. We'll be like, well, like my kids and the pandemic and whatever, right? We'll give this wholesome analysis of like why that might have happened to us. That has nothing to do with the kind of person we are. But when it's someone else, they're lazy and incompetent. And that's just an instinct. That's based on these biases. So the quick question to ask yourself in these situations, when you notice, and you will, that you're doing this stereotype bias, is my experience based on a stereotype or generalization instead of more relevant facts? And that's the important part. So in our example here, the more relevant facts is the proportion of lawyers to librarians in the example. That's a way better basis for the inference about whether they're a librarian, whether Susan is a librarian or a lawyer, than anything about their appearance or their personality. But again, we don't really like to do that. That's hard. Our brain sees that as hard, doesn't want to engage. So this is where unconscious bias comes from. What I think is important is to ground an understanding of unconscious bias in the scientific literature around how our brains work. And to understand that there are a whole other set, there are tons of biases that we use that aren't just limited to this stereotype bias. Okay, and then finally, I gave you this question. So my guess is a lot of people, when you do this not my guess, when you do this as an experiment with a lot of people, what you end up seeing is that a lot of people get the first few correct. That's not surprising. But they also get the last few correct generally, and they do horribly on everything in the middle. Now, why? Why would that be? Well, think about what we've been talking about here, that it's intuition's a subconscious process, and it's about leveraging our past experiences to help us with a current situation. So what cognitive process is involved in leveraging past experiences? What do you have to engage in your brain? What does your brain have to engage in order to access past experiences? Yeah, memory. So memory plays a huge role in our intuition. Now, here's the thing about our memory, empirically. This is just true. We're really good at remembering the first thing we hear. We're often even better at remembering the last thing we hear. And we're terrible at everything in the middle. And this has like practical implications. It's kind of interesting. So, for example, in a political debate, you either want to come out guns a-blazing or you want to be the last person to speak. And it's for a simple reason that people will remember what you said. Also, this is the reason for why getting the last word in is a successful strategy. It's not because people are like, well, I know how our memory works, so I'm going to be the last person to speak. It's simply that you've noticed subconsciously over time that when you're the last one to speak, your ideas end up getting more prevalence in people's thinking. So these are called primacy and recency biases, or shortcuts, right? So that's our tendency to give more weight to the first thing or the last thing we hear. So a good example from people who, for example, read stuff on organizational effectiveness, say from Harvard Business Review. I just read this great article on how important culture is. And for the next number of weeks or days, you're like, you see it everywhere. You're like, this is all about culture. It's all about culture. And it's like, it could be a lot about culture. That could be correct, but you're going to overestimate, based on these biases, how important culture is, at least in the short run, because you're just influenced by the last thing that you read, right? A good, more mundane example of this is often when we're buying a new car, say we're out and we're looking at new cars, then we see that car everywhere on the streets. Well, it's not because that car is all of a sudden, has a higher proportion among cars. It's that you're primed to see it that way because of recency bias. So that's another unconscious bias, is primacy and recency biases. And in order to address this one, it's another simple question. Am I relying on an experience? Like when I get that gut feel, I can go, wait, like, did I just see something similar to this, right? Am I relying on a current, or on an experience of mine because of its order, as opposed to its merit? And merit should always come before order, but you'll default to order. This is patently true. Like that, all of these biases are going to happen to you. It's very unlikely that you'll be able to eliminate them from your thinking, but it is possible to mitigate them through engaging using these reflective questions, right? So if you can't remember any of the specific questions I gave you, you can always ask, when you get that gut feel, you can always ask this one question: do I have sufficient and relevant experience to trust my gut? Sufficient means, do I have enough experience? And relevant means, do I have experience that is related in the right ways to the decision I'm making right now? And my advice is, if the answer to this question is yes, that you do have enough experience and it is related to the thing that you're dealing with, then trust your gut. It's an amazing, intuition is an amazing thing, and we should trust it sometimes. But if the answer is no to either of these things, then that should give you pause. That should force you to look deeper at the question. And one interesting thing is, you should rely on when the answer to this is no, try to crowdsource that sufficient and relevant experience. That's why, working on a team, Now you're not limited to your own experience. You can pool the experiences of people on your team. And that's why it's really important to have a diverse set of team members, because that experience is more widespread, and you're more likely at the sort of group level to have better intuitions than if you're less diverse. So that's everything that I want to present to you today. Before I take questions, I do want to mention we have a platform called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Learning Snippets. So these are 2-minute scenarios that are sent right to your inbox that help you build inclusive behaviors through simulations. And so these help you uncover these unconscious biases and deal with it. And if you're interested in bringing this sort of thing to your team, you can get in touch with me. This is all based on the most recent empirical work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and on learning science. It's the best way to learn these types of skills is to face scenarios in which you have to make these different decisions and start to uncover the biases that you do have and how to correct them. So happy to talk to anyone who wants to check them out. You can also do a free demo on our site. They'll send you one snippet and you can see what it's all about. So I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has. You can write them. You can turn on your video or your microphone and ask them. I'm happy to chat.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm going to kick our questions off with a chat box question that was asked a little bit earlier, and then we can go to anyone with their hand up and anything else in the chat box. So first, Jennifer asked, what we talk about today also apply to neurodiverse and English as second language populations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm not sure about the language question. That's an interesting question. Both of these are empirical questions, so I don't know if I can answer them definitely. But neurodiversity is relevant here, right? The way your brain processes information, if it's importantly different than other people, your intuitions about things are going to be different. That doesn't mean they're better or worse, they're just going to be different. And that's kind of that's actually really baked into the concept of neurodiversity, is that there are different ways of processing information. And some of us have brains that process it one way and others have ways we process it in another way. And at if you looked at a large sample, you're going to see similarities across different neurodiverse people. So it is consistent with this idea that our brain processes information subconsciously, and how our brains are put together is going to be really, going to have an impact on how that process takes place.
Great, thanks, Aaron. I think we'll go to somebody who has their hand up. If you want to come off mute, Tamdi.
Yes, hello.
Hey.
First of all, I want to say that I'm really grateful to be here, and I really enjoyed this conversation thoroughly. So my question is, it's about merit. So you mentioned the remedy. Am I relying on experience because of its order rather than its merit or relevance? So how do we assess the merit?
Yeah, well, that will shift given the context that you're in. But, so like if you're making financial decisions, that's going to really rely on the financial data that you have in front of you, right? And certain kinds of statistical analysis. So the idea is to get out of your, so you might have an instinct of how to address your revenue problem, right? You might have an intuition about that. Go to the financial data to at least test those intuitions. That would be a source of merit, because the math would help you decide and give you an answer that has nothing to do with the way that your brain is processing the information. So that's the idea. That's a financial example, right? So that's the concept, is find a different standard than just your instincts to judge a situation. That's your merit. That's the standard provides the way to judge something by merit.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. We do
Yeah, no
have some
problem.
time for more questions. We're not officially done until 1:30. We don't have to stretch it that long, of course, but if you have any questions left unanswered, I'm happy to read them out. If you want to put them in the chat box, I know not everyone's in a quiet space to come off mute. That's okay. All right.
I wonder if Aaron
Yeah.
could speak to, so I mentioned just in the chat that a lot of these stereotypes and biases are actually sort of like society programs a lot of our patterning and our biases and stereotype. So I just wonder if you could speak a little bit to that and how it is that we overcome, and, you know, like, I sort of like to think the creative brain that actually pauses and thinks and weighs and is skeptical is a good defense. But I just wonder how, if you have, I know this probably was something that would have been in a much longer thing. So if you could just comment on that, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these, what becomes those representations that our brain is going to use to make these quick judgments about people are socially programmed. You're absolutely correct, right? Like, we pick these up from our culture. We pick these up from others. We take cues from others. One thing we're really good at as humans is mimicry. So when we see other people acting a certain way towards certain others, we tend to want to mirror that. So you're not born with the stereotypes. You're born, though, with the tendency to think in stereotypes. But the actual content of a stereotype is culturally determined, right? So one way of combating that is to change those cultural stereotypes, or, you know, eliminate them to the extent possible. And that's a lot of what the efforts go into these days, is try to, you know, when we talk about like dehumanizing people, what you're doing is you're providing a stereotype for this class of people that gives you license to treat them as less human, as lesser than. And so part of that unraveling of this, of racial inequalities, has to do with changing our cultural stereotypes / trying to eliminate or reduce those kinds of stereotypes. So that's where those things overlap. And, you know, there are a lot of really good evidence-based techniques to do this, right? Like, one is contact, is like, that's a really simple idea. The idea is, it becomes a lot harder to see someone as stereotypically X, Y, or Z, or to dehumanize people when you've met them, right? When you've had contact with them, which also is, interestingly, exactly what doesn't happen on social media, for example. So it's not surprising that a rise in racism is coinciding with the rise of social media platforms, because a simple thing like contact is precisely the thing we don't have. It's, you know, it's a keyboard contest. It's it's this stuff that's happening where you're actually disconnected from other people. And we know that connection helps reduce stereotype. So hopefully that gives you some answer. Yeah.
Awesome. Carol, you have your hand up. You can go ahead.
Yes, hi. An example of that really hits home for me is, for 10 or 15 years, I was a leader for La Leche League, which is breastfeeding support for women to woman volunteer. And for all the thousands and tens of thousands and whatever years that women breastfed their babies, somewhere in the early 1900s, they started bottle feeding, and bottle feeding became the norm. And then it became way the common thing. And so I was really concerned in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, that we were telling women, well, use your instincts, use your intuition, because their intuition was so tainted by what they'd seen. They'd never seen breastfeeding. Breastfeeding was hidden and not okay, and bottle feeding was the norm, and that was what they thought was their intuition and their instinct. And so their intuition for how to do it had to be relearned in a way, had to be supported, because societally we had gone away from it in North America. Let's just, be clear that we're talking North America.
That's exactly it. That is an interesting point, that like our intuitions aren't created equal. And if they rely on our experience, then a lack of certain experiences are going to mean we don't have those intuitions. You can't possibly have an intuition about something you've never never seen in some respect. It's just not how they happen. Now, the cognitive ability to have an intuition, that's born in. But the content, again, of those intuitions is based on your actual experience and has a lot to do with our communities and cultures.
And many of us grew up in communities that didn't have diversity. And so that was our, that's our experience.
Yep, that's exactly it.
Okay, anything else today? Any other questions? Oh, yeah, Sanya, go ahead.
Hi, Erin. Thank you so much for today. I thought it was wonderful, and I'm so happy that I was able to join. I had a question, and it's not fully developed, to be honest with you. I'm a mother of two, and I couldn't help but think about, how do we raise these aware and conscious children, and if you have any tips, or if they're different, I guess, to package the thoughts and the concepts that you talked about today to children.
I think exposure is so important, right? And we've heard this a few times, right? That if you've never worked with, played with people who look different than you, then you really pre-programming people to not have those kinds of instincts, and you are, in a way, we can't change the fact that we fear things that are different. That is based on negativity bias. We're built to see things that are threats, and difference, just biologically, we see as threats, right? But that changes very rapidly upon exposure. And I think that that's the important thing. And that if we build communities, we build schools, and we actively put our kids in situations where they're exposed to different cultures and different people, it becomes very, very hard. Just as our stereotypes calcify if we keep reinforcing them. The opposite of that, like inclusion, also can calcify. I mean, there's maybe a better term for that, to default to inclusion. That is possible. We just have to actively provide those opportunities for exposure. That's why, it can feel performative when we see a woman, where we celebrate a woman astronaut. It can kind of, or even more, a Black woman astronaut. But that's actually really, really important, because being able to see that has an impact, right? We get conditioned to accept that as a real thing that I can pursue, and that's available to me as a life pursuit. And so that's one little thing, right? But if you imagine doing that across the board in the sports communities that you enroll your kids in the schools that you have your kids in the activities you have your kids in, it's that exposure, I think, that's absolutely critical. And then as they get older and they can use their intellectual capacities to educate themselves, and that's a whole other set of influences that they can have, because it's one thing to have the visceral experience and to learn what it's like that everyone is equal by just engaging with a lot of different people. There also are, rational based things that we can do to reduce barriers, right? Like research and understanding civil rights movements and things like that are more educational and more analytical can also have that impact once we're ready for it. But I don't think anything can replace the experience of what being with diverse people and seeing diverse people doing things can have on us. It's hard to overestimate how important that is. We know empirically that contact and exposure is absolutely critical.
It does make a lot of sense, and it just kind of made me think, there are so many times when the boys will say something and then I'll think to myself, that's a strange thought. Why do you believe that? And I guess it's just that very moment and that almost that instinct, to just, question it and ask them, why do they think that, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
okay,
because
cool, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Jim?
Yeah, Jim.
Sorry, can you hear me? I was on mute.
Yep.
So my question or comment, firstly, great session. I loved it very much, and
Thanks.
contribution for everybody. My question is kind of a little bit of a follow-up to Tanya. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm at the end of my career. I've been coaching companies for years and mentoring. I'm a new mentor at IG. And one of the things that I've found, and you're talking about, I can so totally see this from when I was, in my businesses and how I made decisions and how we dealt with things, etc. Luckily, I think I had enough good experiences that when I was leaning on intuition, it came out a little more favorably. But for some, that may not be the case. But one of the things that I notice as a coach or an investor, a mentor, an advisor, is quite often, particularly with startups, and I don't mean to minimize the maturity and skills and desires of startups, but in a small sense, they're kind of new to this, right? They may have been working somewhere else, but they're startup people, so they're learning a lot from the beginning.
Yeah.
One of the things I try to do is I feel that we can sometimes have of course we have our own biases, but then we push them onto others, right? And so
Absolutely,
when I'm coaching people, I'm constantly asking them to challenge me, right? This what comes from me isn't not, from God's mouth, right? It just challenge me on anything. And in particular, I ask them to sort of, when you feel middle of the road about whatever maybe that I'm saying, that's a good thing. But if you feel very positive or feel very negative, those are the times when you need to challenge them, right? Because my biases might be now influencing yours, and really trying to be centered in that. I'm just wondering if there's other approaches that I can take to try to help them develop a better critical thinking strategy and not just, put too much emphasis on what their mentors are really trying to give them. We want to give them value, but they have to take that. They're the CEO. They have to develop those strategies and move forward.
Yeah, I think so one way there's a couple ideas. One is that you can use some sort of tool, external tool. Say it's like Toyota came up with the A3, which is actually a size of paper, but the idea was it was a problem-solving tool that helped you get to root causes and then solutions. Now, the value of something like that is that it's not, at the very least, even if some of the inputs are based on your experience, the overarching structure of the decision-making tool is not part of your brain, it's not part of my brain. It's a rational, it's grounded in the case of the A3, it's grounded in pretty good research on problem solving. And it can provide that independent standard that can fill the gap of a critical thinking, in this sense, a literal tool, right? That's kind of independent of my bias brain or your bias brain to the extent possible. Again, full elimination of bias is not really the right standard. It's like, can we mitigate this? Can we use some tool that can give us more objectivity than pure subjectivity? So, and a tool that's independent of our brains is really helpful. They call these like sort of environmental supports, because they're in the environment, they're not in our heads, right? They're external to either of us. So that's one really good technique. And I think another one, like, and you could develop your own critical thinking tool, right? That could help people lead you through the reasons. And that's kind of tied to my next response is, you could ask people, can you reconstruct the advice I gave to you in terms that rely on your own beliefs and assumptions, right? Like, is the argument I've given, can you come up with another argument than the one I gave you that supports this conclusion, that makes sense to you? And then can we compare what those look like? Like, I don't know, and I've worked with lots of coaches, like mentors over the time, like with Innovation Guelph at the Accelerator Center, things like that. The best ones say, here's my advice, but here's a tool, and I want you to tell me if this makes sense in your business and show me how it might. And it is just prodding someone to say, you know, don't depend on my word as gospel. Try to interpret this in your own world and your own thinking, and then make that visible to me, and let's talk about it. Like, the act of making your reasons visible, either through an external tool or even as we're talking, like dialogically, explain this to me in terms that make sense to you. That externalization of the argument and the reasons is often enough to get us outside of a bunch of biases that may otherwise infiltrate our thinking.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I've actually recently gone through an exercise with one of my clients at IG who's going through evaluation, you know, looking for some funding. And of course, their valuation's up here. And I said, my intuition tells me your valuation is here. You know, what I did was I brought 7 different methodologies of evaluation to bear, and we went through them and averaged them. And then I said, here's your tool. Go play with it and tell me your opinion of that. But this is how an investor is going to look at it. So that's excellent. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And evaluation is actually a good example, because there's no agreed upon calculation, right? There's different ways of getting at it. So if you did all these different ways and then average them, as you're saying, you start to, there's a kind of objectivity that's baked in there that like is much more reasonable to put in front of an investor, because what is a business owner, which one are they going to default to if they only used one or none? It's going to be the one that paints their business but a negotiation of if you have a real buyer of that business, what are they going to do? They're going to pick the one that gives you the lowest valuation, and the reality is somewhere in the middle. So if we use tools that both parties can agree upon, or at least negotiate or use to help the negotiation, we can have more trust that we've landed on something that both parties are going to be happy with, right?
Super, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Wonderful. Thank you for everyone's awesome questions. I think we will wrap it up because we only have a couple of minutes left. So a couple of things from me. You'll receive the slides from today, as well as a recording of this session later this week, Thursday or Friday, once we get the recording processed. A big thank you to Erin for being here today. Big thank you to our SLIAO interpreters, Samantha and Robin.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And thank you for everyone for participating. A lot of people came off mute and asked their questions, and if you post them in the chat box, that's wonderful too. So it's always nice when we have people participating every month. If you scroll up in the chat box, I did post a feedback form link. We base these Toolkit Tuesdays every month based on topics that are suggested to us. So this was a topic that came up in November or December. Can you please do this? So we do take your suggestions. So if you'd like to see something based on business or something a little more broad, put them on the feedback form and we'll see what we can do. And otherwise, thank you so much. And we'll see you next month. Our next month session is on Tuesday, February 15th, same time, same place on Zoom. And we'll see you then.
Take care.
Bye-bye.